Chapter 4. The day of the ball arrived. Her dress hung from a hook on the back of her door, and she sat on her bed staring at it. She enjoyed the look of the blue color, but that didn't mean it would look good on her. She had tried it on at Fiora's formal, and Nina heavily complimented her beauty in it. But as she stared at the dress now, she wondered if it would be enough to hold the prince's attention. It appeared rather simple. Then again, simple was what she was, or what she had accepted as her lifestyle. The moments of excitement didn't last long. A few days had passed, and no further incidents had occurred. The sorcerers were gone. They had forgotten about her. She should have felt relieved, and yet something about that incident made her feel stronger and more confident, as if the small things, those that she once feared, may scare her but won't kill her. Hannah changed into her dress, the soft fabric flowing to the floor. She ran her hands along the side in an attempt to smooth the wrinkles. Her thin form appeared more like a child than that of a young lady. She sat down at her vanity, wondering what she could do to appear more mature. Hannah decided on a braid, which she could drape over her shoulder, showing her genuine, down-to-earth personality. However, the single braid seemed all too familiar in her mind, so she spun the braid into a bun, which lived elegantly atop her head. Looking at her face, Hannah inspected the different cosmetics in her possession. She carefully added makeup to her look, hoping it would appear natural and not theatric. Lastly, she added a necklace her mother had given her, with clear gemstones and a silver plating. At long last, she examined herself in the mirror, understanding that the person staring back at her was who the prince was to see. She sighed. The butterflies in her stomach and the doubts in her mind kept her stationed in her chair. Hannah did not want to move. She knew the ending to the ball. It would involve her being tired, exhausted, and walking home, alone, in the dark. No better off than when she left. One could say she was worse off considering the money she spent on the dress, not to mention leaving her mother to work the bakery for the entire day. Hannah heard a knock on the front door, followed by Van's drudging footsteps. He expectedly shouted her name. She released a calming exhale, attempting to settle her stomach. Slowly rising from her chair, Hannah took one last glance at her simple self before turning her eyes to the ground and leaving her room. Nina stood by the door, swaying to and fro as she waited for Hannah. She wore a full-length ball gown. The top was corseted and embroidered with white lace. Her dress was a bright shade of purple, one nobody could miss, elegant and, as Nina would put it, queenly. As Hannah rounded the corner, Nina delightedly squealed, her excitement evident from the large smile and glimmering eyes. She rushed Hannah and wrapped her arms around her. "You look beautiful!" Nina exclaimed, holding Hannah at arm's length and looking her up and down. "Thank you. You look beautiful as well. I'm sure the prince won't be able to look away," Hannah responded. Nina didn't pick up on the forced enthusiasm. "I know! I'm so excited, Hannah. You have no idea." Nina spun around, her dress twirling about her. Van sat at the table and, not so subtly, stared at the pair. The light caught Nina perfectly, as if she was already queen. Her smile was so radiant, Hannah could not help but express a genuine smile. She knew, on the inside, she should be happy for her friend, and yet there was a tinge of irritation. Nina grabbed Hannah's hand and pulled her through the doorframe into the outside world. "We need to get going if we're going to get a good seat for the dinner," Nina said. Her tone sounded confident and cool, her composure within her control. Hannah envied her lack of anxiety and doubt. She wondered if Nina hid her nerves or if she was really as confident as she acted. She's known Nina for a long time, and she's never seen her afraid or anxious, as if Nina was incapable of feeling such fragile emotions. They arrived at the castle. A line of young, unmarried women gathered around. Many were in their groups of friends, but some others were alone, whether because they didn't have friends or because they were the last of the group to get married. Hannah recognized the vast majority of them. The ones she didn't, she assumed were from the smaller villages not far from Wickborough. The castle towered towards the heavens, constructed of beautiful gray stone brick. A large fountain lay in the center of the bailey, the sound of the water calming in the nerve-wracking situation. Hannah had never seen the castle up close. and its simplistic majesty called for admiration from all who looked upon it. On most days, when the clouds were limited, one could view the upper turrets and the roof of the keep from town. But to be up close to the spectacle was an incredible experience. One by one, the ladies handed in their invitations and signed their names into the guest entry. After they were escorted by the ushers of the court to the banquet hall, where the tables for the guests lined the 3 outer walls. The royal table sat in the front, and the middle of the floor was open for dancing. The prince had not yet arrived, but many of his royal court were seated and in a state of thorough examination of the ladies. Hannah stuck close to Nina. Though in awe of every detail of architecture and furnishings, her nerves never relaxed. If anything, her nerves grew with the crowd around them. Hannah had not realized the number of unmarried women in the kingdom, nor that there would ever be a moment when they were all gathered in one place. The feelings of being watched, though uncomfortable for Hannah, were inevitable in a hall filled with women competing for the title of queen. Not to mention, she had Nina at her side. Nina did not bother watching the competition, though she was quite upset when she caught a glimpse of another girl in a dress similar to her own. Rather, she spent her time observing those at the royal table, knowing they may be useful tools in convincing the prince of her worthiness, that is, if she needed to manipulate them in such ways. Within the castle, her confidence magnified, as if getting closer to the prince secured her chances. The pair found seats next to a few girls they remembered from school, their table not far from the royal table. Nina and Hannah sat down, claiming their spot in the banquet hall. Nina continued to watch the royal court, widening her eyes and smiling when she believed them to be looking at her. Hannah gawked at the high ceiling and crystal chandelier, the tapestries on the wall equally as impressive. The decadency of the room added to her apprehension, her hands anxiously rubbing her thighs. She closed her eyes, hoping if she blocked out the crowds of people and their loud chatter, her heart and breathing would relax. The crowds of ladies thinned as they began to find seats at the tables. No one knew when the events of the evening would begin, but many did not seem impatient about rushing through the night. It was quite the opposite. Being within the castle, in formal attire, and as a guest, the ladies were relishing the opportunity of being treated like royalty without actually being royalty. Nina finished her observation and turned to Hannah. "The interior of the castle is just as magnificent as I expected," Nina commented with a delightful grin as she looked around the hall. "It is beautiful, isn't it?" "Yes, but why should we expect any less? I mean, the royal family is held in very high regard, and they must appear superior to those important figures who visit from other kingdoms. That's why the role of the queen is so significant. I have to be able to communicate with the women from other kingdoms, portraying myself as friendly and diplomatic, which isn't hard for me," Nina said. She began to silently rate those sitting around her, ensuring none would steal attention away from herself. With her statements, the ladies who happened to be listening in glared at the pair. Hannah looked down at her hands. She disliked when people looked at her in such a manner, as if being Nina's friend made her accountable for every word to leave Nina's mouth. "When do you suppose the prince will arrive?" asked Hannah, attempting to change the subject. "I suppose he's already watching. I mean, the best way to get to know someone when you're the prince is to see how they act when you're not around. I suppose that's what he's thinking. A queen must always act like a queen, even out of the presence of royalty." Those who were listening began looking around, hoping to catch a glimpse of the prince. When they couldn't see him, their eyes returned to Nina, wondering if she had been serious or not. Nina giggled. "I feel like I'm going crazy. It's all too good to be true. Like a dream, one I don't wish to wake from any time soon." Nina closed her eyes and took in a large breath, absorbing every scent of the castle into her pores. Her entire body tensed with excitement as the aromas of the meal reached her. Hannah turned to see the many kitchen hands wheeling carts of food from the kitchen. The food looked exquisite, the appearance of which made her mouth water. She was sure only a small fraction of the ladies in the room had ever eaten of a feast as regal as this. After the waiters got into position, they waited near their carts for further instruction. At this point, every seat at the royal table was occupied, with the exception of the prince. But then came the sounds of trumpets from the front of the hall. Every person within understood the meaning, so they rose to their feet, standing beside their chairs and turned toward the front. The trumpet stopped, and the prince entered. Every young lady swooned at his appearance, at least half of which were audible. His very presence commanded the attention of all in the room, from his glowing smile to his glittering eyes, from his regal attire clothing his fit figure to the royal crown atop his head. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that he had the presence of a king, and one fortunate lady within the banquet hall would come to wed him. Hannah smiled as she stared at him, for, to her, his appearance and manner were as magnificent as a castle itself. The prince took his seat. The rest at the royal table came next, followed by the guests. When everyone had their seats, the volume of the hall increased, and the waiters began to serve the food. Most girls were talking about the prince, their opinions of his appearance a heavily agreed upon topic. Nina joined in with the other girls' conversation, her confidence never waning. Hannah remained quiet. She picked at the food in front of her, which looked and smelled delicious. Unfortunately, she was too nervous to eat. The butterflies in her stomach continued to swirl around, not wanting to calm, no matter the breathing exercises she employed. She turned her head to the royal table to steal another glimpse of the prince. The man sitting next to him, she believed him to be the royal advisor, was talking to the prince about something she assumed must be boring, for the prince seemed uninterested. Rather, his inquisitive, ice-blue eyes examined every lady in the room, some holding his attention longer than others. As his eyes continued their journey throughout the banquet hall, they managed to connect with Hannah as she took another peek. Her face expressed embarrassment, and she quickly looked away. She didn't want to know the expression the prince wore, for it was probably one of amusement. Nina, who noticed Hannah's reaction, looked to her and then at the prince. When she saw the prince watching her, she shared a flirtatious grin and turned back to her food. Hannah glanced at Nina, internally understanding what her thoughts must be. Hannah ate the rest of her food in silence, never peering up from her plate for the remainder of the feast.